From claiming that Durant can't take criticism very well, to making the players believe that he'll never be good enough to face him, there's no shortage of reasons for Kevin Durant to hate Charles Barkley, especially since he just called him sensitive on television. There's a few facts of life that you can be sure of every day. The sky is blue, night follows day, and Charles Barkley is gonna say something to annoy Kevin Durant. The two legends have been snapping at each other for years, locked in a constant back and forth that only escalates as the days go by. You might be asking, why would anyone want to complain about Durant? He's pretty much one of the greatest to ever play the game. He has 2 rings on his fingers, and he shows up in pretty much everyone's top 10 lists. So, what's Chuck's issue? Well, Barkley is known to pride himself on keeping stars' egos in check, something he did once again at Durant's expense while on 60 Minutes. According to Barkley, Durant has an issue that plagues many players, and it's that he's just too sensitive to criticism. For Chuck, there's no denying that Durant is an amazing player. He says it himself in that same interview after all. But to be truly great, he needs to be able to hear about his faults. The Suns legend sees him as a part of a general issue among the modern generation of the NBA, that players nowadays are soft. Of course, you could also argue that calling someone sensitive on television isn't exactly the best way to give them advice, especially since this ribbing on Durant is kind of a pattern for him. Of course, Durant wasted no time in clapping back. He's no stranger to being blasted by critics, professionals, and fans alike, especially over the last couple of years. Even if you're a casual NBA fan, you know exactly what I'm talking about. The uproar over Kevin Durant leaving the Oklahoma City Thunder and joining the Golden State Warriors. This created the ultimate basketball super team and netted him his 2 championship rings. The move has been a permanent mark on his record, creating countless voices calling him a snake and claiming he couldn't win a ring without the Warriors. So it makes sense why Durant would be irked at having to hear Chuck say he can't take criticism. Of course, KD is a social media clapback aficionado and immediately went to Twitter to give Barkley a piece of his mind. The 2-time champion gave Charles a piece of his mind, letting him know that he didn't need advice from him because he didn't really give any importance to anything he said. Basically, he told Barkley to start keeping his name out of his mouth. Phew, talk about Twitter beef. Of course, this was far from the first time the two have gone at each other. Who can forget the time Chuck called Durant a bus driver for the Phoenix Suns? Look, Barkley has been an analyst for years now. He has a ton of experience under his belt and has never been afraid to critique any player that he feels isn't performing up to the mark. He's kind of known for it at this point. That being said, I'm not gonna lie and claim there weren't a few eyebrows raised. Yeah, the guy is pretty blunt about how he feels. Basically, he said that Durant hadn't proved that he was a leader yet, and that he hadn't won a ring as the key element of the team or as an inspirational leader, and his past 2 rings weren't good enough. Imagine going on television and announcing to the world that you thought Durant was essentially a has-been. To add salt onto the wound, the Hall of Famer took it a step further, pulling out names of superstars like Kobe and LeBron, and quoting them and saying that they had to win championships without head for veterans to respect them. He straight up told Durant that he hasn't earned his respect yet. Of course, you could see this in a more positive light. Barkley is a name synonymous with the Phoenix Suns after all, so he obviously wants the team to do well. This might have been an example of genuine advice that was just worded a little poorly. Of course, if you were to ask KD, he'd probably give you a very different perspective. One he made clear by calling Chuck a straight-up liar. Sure, Charles Barkley has never been one to sugarcoat what he thinks, but it's not like KD has a history of taking shots lying down either. He's been known to fire off a couple zingers right back in the past, and boy oh boy did he pull out the arsenal for this particular group of retorts. Of course, like the avid Twitter troll that he is, his first instinct was to tweet about how he thought Charles was an old fraud. Wow, I won't lie, that's pretty harsh. He even said flat out that he thinks Barkley is jealous of him because he doesn't make as much money as Durant does. Basically, he's always going to hate whatever Durant does, because according to KD, he just isn't as successful as him. This kind of beef is pretty unprecedented. You don't usually see 2 legends going at it this harshly every day, which makes the fact that Durant did even more to drag Barkley through filth even more eye-popping. He called him a liar in front of the entire internet. But what did Detective Durant call out exactly? Well, remember that quote from LeBron that Chuck so happily used? Well, Durant flat out thinks that Charles made it up. He immediately pointed out that he had never heard LeBron say this, and that there were no records that he could prove it. So either Barkley had a completely unknown conversation with the king, or he's lying through his teeth. If that's true, then it'd be kind of insane that Barkley would go so far in his dislike that he made up an entire conversation. Of course, you can't really put it behind him. This is the guy who called Durant Mr. Miserable. Okay, this story is kind of on the funnier side of things, but that's just because of how ridiculous the whole affair was, in sheer terms of how definitively it showcased how much Durant annoys Barkley. You know, there is one thing that NBA fans can always rely on, come rain or shine, and it's the constant supply of entertainment that they get from the Durant and Chuck beef. Back in 2022, Chuck sat down with a radio host and decided to go off on his favorite topics. I'm sure you guys can guess which one it is. So, what was today's topic of Durant riffing? Well, this time, Charles was peeved about Durant's trade requests from the Nets, and how he was sure Durant's ego had started to overshadow his abilities. Like every other critic, he poked at Durant's lack of any ring after leaving the Warriors, going so far as to call him an abject failure. To Chuck, there just isn't any real element of respect for KD. And there probably won't be until KD decides to get himself a ring outside of the Warriors. Something that Charles already thinks he can't do, because he doesn't have the same kind of leadership abilities as people who are in the GOAT conversation. The lambasting didn't stop there, with Chuck deciding to get a little personal and flat out call KD Mr. Miserable, stating that Durant would never actually be happy, even though he has had so many opportunities given to him on a gold platter. Basically, he had all the respect in the world and was now moaning about having lost it. Durant has not been happy about everything he's been hearing from Chuck over the years. At this point, it seems like he'll never be good enough. To understand why all the constant ribbing affects KD so much, you need to realize the kind of career that this man has had. Even with all the criticism, so many people around the world have put him firmly in the conversation for one of the best players, without even a second's hesitation. He's one of the heroes of the basketball world, and has one of the most spotless scoring records in the history of the sport. It's telling that he's one of the few players people will ever put up against LeBron. So you can see how the disrespect has an added level of sting to him. What does he have to do to prove himself? For him, it probably seems like he'll never be enough. He finally expressed his frustration, stating that he knew nothing he did would ever really earn the respect of analysts like Shaq and Charles, and that he was done trying to please them or get in their good books. This must be particularly heartbreaking for Durant, who has always expressed that he respects Barkley as a player. After all, Barkley is one of the legends of the Phoenix Suns, and KD knows that he's the image that he's going to have to live up to. In the end, I can only hope that the two legends recognize each other's game. So, from making Durant believe that he'll never be good enough to face him, to Barkley saying Durant can't take any criticism, these are the reasons Kevin Durant hates Charles Barkley.